Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of All Access AM. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for joining me on this Monday of championship week across college football. ACC has its ACC Championship game set. It is Duke sliding in there to take on Virginia Saturday night on ABC. We will have plenty of preview content around the actual game later in the week as well, but really excited to have Conor O'Neill, covers Duke, joining us at 7:30 a.m. Central Time, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. For those of you who want to stick around for that, he will break down the Blue Devils, how they got to the ACC Championship game, the feeling down there, or over there, I should say, as Manny Diaz's crew did make it into the ACC Championship game. Virginia also, of course, taking care of business Saturday night in Charlottesville against Virginia Tech. We'll talk about that. We'll have full Week 14 reaction on the show, as the ACC actually did all right against its SEC counterparts in some of these rivalry games. So not a bad showing for the ACC this weekend, but we will talk about the issue that the ACC now has at hand, which if you've been living under a rock, you don't know about. But for everybody else who is tuned into the show, being most likely an ACC sicko listening to this, you have known that the quote-unquote doomsday scenario is at least now in play for the ACC, and all the talking points around it that are now in play with Duke playing for an ACC championship. So excited to have you guys with us on All Access AM. I'm Billy Embody. We have Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 7 to 8 a.m. Central Time, 8 to 9 Eastern Time. We are live on this channel, wherever you're watching us at. But please go to our YouTube page, All Access AM, and hit the subscribe button for me. Please do that. It helps us out a ton. Google it, All Access AM, click the page, and click that subscribe button for us. We really appreciate you guys who have done that. By the end of this week, we want to be at 200 subscribers. I know that sounds small, but you got to build this thing slowly but surely. And we appreciate you guys who have been locked in with us from the get-go. The ACC Championship game set for Saturday. I mentioned it right off the bat, and we will kind of give initial reaction to this game being what it is. Virginia, Duke, in this unlikely, in a sense, matchup between these two teams that going into the season, you might have had Duke as a trendy dark horse pick to win the ACC with Darian Mensah. You had Virginia, who was really hoping to bounce back from the season they had. They had just given Tony Elliott, weapons and means to be competitive in this world of college football and the revenue sharing and NIL space. And they end up being the representatives for this league in the ACC Championship game, but very much a departure from what most everyone, I think, in the ACC was certainly, let's just say, probably hoping for. Clemson, Miami came into the season with so much promise, so much hype around them. And Miami, we'll talk about them for sure as they demolished Pitt over the weekend. But you have those two teams, in Clemson's case, fall off. You have Miami, who certainly still very much in the picture for an ACC or for a college football playoff appearance, potentially. Don't think it's going to happen, but it is at least on the table until it's not. But you did not see them take care of business in league play to be in Charlotte. And then you've got teams like SMU, Louisville, who just beat themselves too much this year to end up playing in Charlotte. And we have Duke and UVA. That is how we got there for the most part. But 8 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff on Saturday on ABC. We'll talk with Conor O'Neill at 8:30 about Duke. We'll get somebody on to talk a little UVA or maybe somebody national to preview the game with us later this week, and we'll kind of deep dive into that. I do want to give my take on this look for the ACC. And I think it's one that I don't think it's necessarily good for the ACC that these are the two teams playing. I think Virginia, first and foremost, has very much earned the right to be there. They have taken care of business and won the games put in front of them enough to be in the position to be in the championship game. And I'm very much a person who wants to give credit for wins despite the schedule that they played, despite some of the, let's just say, I think, tight roping the schedule and how good the schedule was versus how the results played out. Like Virginia had to have a lot of bounces go their way to get to where they are. But you know what? They earned those bounces. They made them happen. That's a part of football. But again, the schedule leaves it as a very real concern, I think, when, let's say, Virginia wins this game, that if they get to the college football playoff, what happens? And the same thing with Duke. Duke was able to take care of league play games well enough to get their spot in the ACC Championship game. But Duke, on the other hand, did not give the ACC any help in terms of its non-conference performance. They lost all 3 Power 4 games that they played, and they lost them, 2 of the 3 in kind of, I don't want to say embarrassing fashion, but kind of embarrassing fashion when you're a Duke team that was, kind of a trendy dark horse pick to play for the ACC championship, and you'd spend all this money on Darian Mensah, and you have that type of a performance in non-conference. It's just the next step for Manny Diaz and company, now that they've gotten the ability to kind of taste this moment that they will on Saturday, is you've got to find a way to pull through for this league and start winning some of those games when you look at next year's schedule, just to help the league. And there's teams like Clemson who did their part beating South Carolina. There's teams like Clemson who didn't do their part and lost to an LSU that ended up being, a team that wasn't very good, fired their coach. SMU didn't take care of business against Baylor, TCU. Other teams out there that didn't take care of business in non-conference play. So trust me, it's not a Duke thing. It's very much a league thing that needs to change and it needs to improve. And they've got to find ways to build rosters that can compete with some of these teams that they do face, and they get these opportunities to take them down. They've got to strike while the iron's hot, So it's a really interesting discussion around this ACC championship game and what it means. What ACC fans should be rooting for, in my opinion, is Virginia to obviously win. That gives the ACC a clear path to the college football playoff. It obviously means a nice boost in revenue for Virginia. I believe it gets distributed across the ACC as well. So very, very important that Duke wins that ACC championship on Saturday, that Virginia wins that ACC championship on Saturday. The talking points, though, around this league, I think we've seen it, how competitive it is when teams like Miami have 2 losses, when teams like Pitt are able to do what they did once they made the change at quarterback. You look at Louisville blowing out Kentucky that led to Mark Stoops' firing on Sunday evening. You have all of these pieces to the puzzle of why this league is competitive, but yet it doesn't get the credit it deserves. And we're 8 minutes and 38 seconds or so into this show. And when talking about non-conference, of course, Florida State beat Alabama to lead off this year. So it's a league that has a perception problem, but the reality of this league is they have these rosters that I do think are talented enough and good enough to compete with most everybody across the country. There's your Georgias, there's your, I would say Alabama, but look at what happened in week 1. But there's so many good teams at the top of college football right now, and you don't know if the ACC's best this year could really compete with some of them. The only one who's kind of shown some of that is Miami with their wins over Notre Dame earlier this year. So there is that kind of line to walk when talking about this league, because there is so much NFL talent that comes through it. There's really good coaches. I think the coaching talent in this league is as good as anywhere in the country, in a sense. Like the amount of coaches that are very much in position every year to have their team able to compete for an ACC championship, it's real. It's a reality. And that's why it's such a competitive league. when you look up and down some of that preseason poll around the league, you could have made arguments for all sorts of teams to have spots in Charlotte. You had, of course, Clemson picked as the ACC favorite going into the season. Most everybody, including myself, thought they would be nationally a top 5 team throughout the year. But you know what? They didn't end up getting any better than they were last year. They obviously regressed, and they ended up being a lot of kind of who everybody thought Clemson was going into the college football playoff last year. Maybe a little bit of a luck of the draw that they made it to Charlotte. Maybe a team that didn't really have a good win on the year, and it showed when they played Texas. So you look up and down that top 7 of the preseason poll. It was Clemson, Miami, SMU, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Duke, and Florida State. Those rosters could have gone out and done some of the things that you would hope your ACC champion would do, or a college football playoff participant from this league would do, and they showed flashes. We've seen Clemson show the flashes. They were not remotely consistent enough to accomplish what their goals were and what the preseason said. Miami kind of Miami'd a little bit in league play for just long enough to cost them a shot at an ACC championship. SMU 1-3 in 1-score games, a really, really disappointing season for SMU that also featured 2 losses to Big 12 teams that are in their home state. Georgia Tech able to, piece together this historic run to start the season and kind of fades down the stretch as their defense, really in particular couldn't step up to the plate. Louisville was a pick there for a second to maybe represent the ACC, and just they broke themselves for a second there. And Duke obviously hung around long enough to get to the ACC championship, but it is there's nothing you can do about the non-conference schedule when the conference slate is set up the way it is. So Duke's playing for it. Florida State, we saw flashes. They beat Alabama, obviously weren't consistent enough. And then you kind of get down in that bottom half or so of this league, and it's Pitt. We saw NC State have flashes. Virginia was picked 14th. Wake Forest was picked 16th. And so, you have a Cal team that beat SMU this weekend too. So a lot of really, really interesting pieces to this puzzle for the ACC. But I think about this week for the ACC. This week is an opportunity to maybe change some of the perception. And I don't think it's going to be because of the product Virginia and Duke put on the field on Saturday. I think we'll see early pick, obviously, Virginia to win the ACC championship. But the talking point should be very well organized around how competitive this league is. Miami can beat Notre Dame. Well, guess what? SMU can go out and beat Miami. Louisville can go out and beat Miami. That's conference competition, and that's conference just depth in general. And you look at some of these other leagues that get credit for some of the wins because they're big names in big stadiums, but Vanderbilt going in and killing Tennessee, or Missouri being ranked in the top 25, it's silly. It's really just kind of crazy to see some of the narratives built around these leagues just because of where you go and how many people you play in front of. I think that's what it boils down to. Nobody is going to give credit to Cal for beating SMU in a half-empty stadium, but look at Cal's quarterback, Sagapatelli, and what he's able to do, and the talent on that team that they really do have. They just are a coaching staff away from being one of the better teams in this league. I mean, in my opinion. And that was where they fell very short. And you could tell the organization around Stanford and where they're headed. And we'll talk about Tavita Pritchard getting hired there at the end of the show. But Stanford's organization and the culture they had and the culture they are building was able to go out and execute and force those turnovers and capitalize on Cal. And that's why Justin Wilcox gets fired. That's conference depth and competitiveness. Now, there are times when you look at this league and you see a couple teams playing, you're like, ooh, that matchup, that is just not high-level football being played. There's defensive struggles. There's this, there's that. We know what Boston College ended up being this year. So at the same time, there's some of that in other leagues as well. So it really is a perception issue that the ACC if they're organized this week, and so much around college football is going to be talked about with the coaching carousel, in particular with Lane Kiffin going to LSU and some of the college football playoff madness that might be created depending on the SEC championship result. And really that'll be around seeding. But you have a league that is competitive. It is talented. There are good coaches in this league. There needs to be a concerted effort to find a way to get that out there more and more and more and create a year-round interest in this league because it is an interesting league. And so that is something that the league has to figure out in the coming days, weeks, and months to fix this perception issue. It speaks to the investment that Virginia made. That is why Virginia is sitting there in the ACC Championship. They can't control their schedule, but 10-2 overall, and one of their losses coming without their starting quarterback. That is investment in the roster, and they have figured out how to make this thing go. That's not a poor depth of league. That's Virginia going out and investing. It just didn't get some of the fanfare that other teams did nationally. But kudos to them for being where they are because of that investment. So it is a perception problem the ACC has. They can start the narrative anytime they want on how to fix it. We are presented by our friends at Security National Bank. Really appreciate them for sponsoring our Monday show. Make sure you go to securitynational.bank for more information on how they can help you achieve your financial goals. It's a family-run bank, family-run business. They have personal and business checking accounts and savings and credit cards and all sorts of ways that you can, again, achieve your goals, get to that next level that you want to be at financially. That's what Security National Bank can bring to the table for you. Go to securitynational.bank for more information or call them 402-344-7300 and reach out to them and see what they can do for you. They're a fantastic family-run bank, and they'll treat you with that level of respect and that commitment to you that you would expect from your bank. So appreciate our friends at Security National Bank for supporting us and sponsoring our Monday show. All Access AM, you can follow us 7 to 8 a.m. Central Time, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, please hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel, All Access AM. You can Google it and find us there. Conor O'Neill joins us in 12 minutes or so. He does cover Duke for the On3 Sports Network. Excited to hear from Conor. We've had him on the show before. A wealth of knowledge across the state of North Carolina and just all around good guy. So excited to have Conor join us. As Hayden Howerton pointed out in the chat, UVA does not get the same credit as Texas Tech. Same number of in-league losses. It's true. It's true. We have the of course the NC State loss hanging out there for Virginia, but it was non-conference. And again, both, funny enough, Texas Tech and UVA, their lone losses in league play being without their starting quarterback for much of, if not all of it. So really interesting stuff there. I'd love to get, and this is probably an off-season thing, but we'll get more involved with some of these schools around, maybe getting some of their people on the show and talking about how Virginia was built into, an ACC championship game participant. So excited to kind of dive into some of that when we're not chock full of games to talk about, which 20 minutes in, guys, a lot of you guys have reached out in the comments or texted me or emailed and said how much you appreciate running through the entire slate of ACC games. And we had a week 14 that obviously had everybody playing, had everybody facing some sort of rivalry and or kind of must-win situation with regards to the ACC championship. So let's try to run down some of these. I will keep it rolling for you guys as quickly as I can here, because here's the thing about week 14. The season is now over in a sense. Duke and Virginia are the only teams that are playing next week. So a lot of these results don't necessarily matter as much, especially with some being in non-conference play. Appreciate Charles for chiming in the chat. But some of them have meaning, and we've got to react to some of them. So let's fly through them. Georgia Tech. I watched this game. UGA wins 16-9. The funny thing about this is obviously I spoke earlier about Georgia Tech's defense not really showing up when they needed it to this year in ACC play. Well, they showed up against Georgia. Georgia Tech was able to hold them to a respectable 16-9. And I think watching this game unfold, you saw obviously the strength of Georgia as far as their defense goes and what they were able to do to limit Haynes King. He was very limited as far as a runner, 10 carries, 39 yards. He had 181 yards passing, didn't throw a touchdown, threw a pick. Gunnar Stockton, 11 of 21, 70 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 INT. Here's the thing that won't get talked about. And this is an aside. I don't even really want to break down this game because it was 1, ugly, 2, Georgia Tech is out now. And this will probably be the case with a lot of these games when they don't have too much meaning to them. But and let me be very clear. Georgia is a very good roster. They are a very good team. But no one is going to talk about Gunnar Stockton being held to under 100 yards, by a Georgia Tech defense that has gotten absolutely shredded down the stretch. Again, if this was an ACC game, what would people be saying right now? It's always fascinating to kind of say, hey, what if things were billed differently, like as a conference game or this game or that game or not a rivalry game? Always interesting to see, maybe envision how the conversation would be going around some of these games. If Georgia Tech was an ACC matchup, you would hear a lot more of the storylines around, whoa, Georgia, all right, yeah, they're in the college football playoff, but how big of a concern is Gunnar Stockton? They're not passing the eye test in that regard. That is a huge red flag for Georgia going into the college football playoff, that they played the way they did offensively against Georgia Tech. Nate Frazier had 100 yards on the ground, so kudos to him for bringing it. But other than that, Georgia Tech's defense stepped up, and Georgia's defense did what it has a tendency to do, which is just really, really dominate at the line of scrimmage. So just a shame for Georgia Tech. And I said this on the show last week, or 2 weeks ago now. Haynes King would have won the Heisman Trophy if he had proved it and shown it in these final 2 weeks. I think with this type of an end, you're seeing that the opportunity was there for him to go out and play at a super high level the last 2 weeks. And instead, he did not. And I feel for him. He's a great dude and just from down the road in Longview, Texas from me, but was not able to get it done. And Georgia Tech misses out on an opportunity to really a golden opportunity. They were in that game for much of it, in a sense. It never felt like Georgia was going to give it up. They led 13-3 at the half, but when you look at that game as a whole, it was there. And that's kind of the frustrating thing for some of these ACC games and kind of how they ended up going. Notre Dame takes care of business at Stanford. That was a game that, no surprise, but Jeremiah Love does get hurt. Really, really difficult for him on the Notre Dame side of things. But we'll talk a little bit more about Stanford here at the end of the show after we get done with Conor, because they hired their head coach, Tavita Pritchard. Really excited to see what he does there. But Notre Dame was just able to do Notre Dame things. CJ Carr was efficient again. They were just really, really impressive as a whole. They led 35-3 at half. So that game was really not in any sort of danger for Notre Dame, which is as expected. The Miami Pitt game, and I'm going down now the list of just what I have in front of me. I usually do this a lot better where I go in chronological order, but I'm just running it down because, like I said, some of these we're going to fly through. Miami dominates Pitt, and I was surprised. I just thought Pitt would have found a way to be more competitive. And at one point, this game wasn't, it was close. I mean, it was, and you see some of the big plays that Miami was able to make late in that first half, scoring right before the half really hurt. It was 10-7. It was a ball game, and all of a sudden it's 17-7, and Miami opens the second half with a score as well. So then it kind of got away from Pitt, and there you go. So Pitt had a lot of fight. Mason Heichel did, he was cooking at one point. I even sent sent a tweet, and of course it happened. I said he was cooking, and it was just when Pitt had kind of fired back and taken that 7-3 lead, and it was really starting to I thought it was going to trend towards maybe being a little bit of a shootout because Miami responded right away, and it was, I think, early-ish second quarter, and I just kind of thought that both offenses were starting to get going, but instead Mason Heichel and company just did not get anything done beyond that. 22 of 32, 199 yards, touchdown and INT. Carson Beck, 23 of 29, 267 yards, 3 touchdowns and interception. You got to give him a ton of credit, man. He was just playing at a really high level up there in the cold. And Miami still managed 140 yards on the ground. So Miami flexes its muscle. It was a really nice statement win for them to get that one done. They will have an argument that they're always going to make in terms of the college football playoff now. I don't think it's going to be enough. But Miami, their 2 losses, 1 possession games, one of them in overtime, one of them driving to win, quarterback throws an interception. That is just going to be gut-wrenching for Miami fans to think about and talk about for years to come, because this team had some of the makeup of being able to get this across the finish line. So Miami, great work. I thought the Pitt defense, kind of similar to that Notre Dame game, the Pitt defense, held up its end of the bargain for much of that first half, and instead Miami was able to pull away by winning that end of the half, first few minutes of that second half opportunity that teams have to kind of create separation. Virginia, we'll talk about this game and how Virginia was able to just dominate Virginia Tech. 0 just offensive ability from Virginia Tech. They just weren't able to do anything. Kyron Jerones, 4 of 16. 78 yards. A lot more is going on at Virginia Tech, obviously, with the coaching change. They finished 3-9 on the year, 2-6 in ACC play. They had 6 first downs. They had less first downs than points. Just kind of insane when you think about it. But Chandler Morris showed why he's playing at a high level when he's healthy. 21 of 35, 182 yards. Didn't turn the ball over. Just efficient overall. And you've got to give Virginia a lot of credit for being ready to go mentally. They built a 14-0 halftime lead, and then they just cruised. I mean, they really did. So Virginia Tech has a lot of things on the recruiting side of things that it's doing. They're pushing for a top 25 class, and they will be, I think, dangerous next year. I don't know. I think the goal next year would be to get to a bowl game, but I think that's on the table for them. It's going to take a lot of hard work in that portal, which opens January 2nd with James Franklin taking over there. When you look at Virginia did exactly what you would have hoped they would have done. They didn't leave anything to chance, and they were able to take down Virginia Tech and win their 3rd game of this century in this rivalry. So I know it's a party in Charlottesville. They've got a chance now to win an ACC championship, and I tell you what, the ACC really needs Virginia to take care of business. And we're going to get to Conor O'Neill in just a second. But before we do that, do want to go down this SMU Cal game real quick, because this is the game that put Duke in the ACC championship. When we get back after our interview with Conor O'Neill, we'll break down the rest of the game, some final takeaways on those, and talk about Tavita Pritchard. And we'll kind of try to do all of that and get you out of here, so to speak, in the early 8 o'clock Central Time hour. 7 to 8 a.m. Central, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern is when we broadcast Monday, Wednesday, Thursday on All Access AM. SMU goes at Cal, late night kick. It was a 9 o'clock Dallas time kick for the SMU Mustangs, but you would have thought it was 9 a.m. Dallas time the way they showed up from kind of right off the bat. Really disappointing for SMU. They go out on the opening drive, didn't get anything accomplished. They get a stop previously to open the game, and then Cal was able to go down and get a field goal. SMU responds with a long touchdown run by Chris Johnson Jr. But other than that, SMU really wasn't able to do much of anything offensively. They had spurts and bits and pieces that they were able to do, but it was a 17-7 halftime lead for Cal. It really just, for SMU to show up that way, it was really just shocking. Like, with everything on the line, a playoff game for SMU, win in advance. it showed that this team that SMU has for this season, they always fought every single game. Nobody can, say that this SMU team didn't have fight. They didn't, finish as hard as they could, but they did not have the ability to finish ball games. And that's what cost them a spot in the ACC Championship. And it is because SMU was so flawed going into this season. And it all showed up at Cal. All of the things that SMU hadn't been doing, it showed up at Cal. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more on the other side here. But we do have Conor O'Neill joining us. And Conor's appearance on All Access AM is presented by our friends at Corporate Magic. We really appreciate them for what they do for us at All Access AM. Incredible live events that you will remember. And you guess what? You probably don't even know that Corporate Magic is doing them. But from national sales meetings to huge live concerts and other events, the team has decades of experience for every project. They can combine planning, design, and technology to keep your audiences fully engaged. The big stage demands a partner who knows how to perform when the stakes are high. So visit corporatemagic.com for more information on what they can do to help your company, your brand. Hell, if you're high rolling enough, maybe it's a party for you. Maybe Corporate Magic will do that for you. Maybe they're doing events for the ACC. I don't know. We don't know. But what I can tell you is they're incredible events. They do them at such a high level, and we appreciate their support of All Access AM. And joining us now on All Access AM is Conor O'Neill. Conor, thanks so much for the time, man. Your weekend plans, certainly taking the shift here, thanks to SMU.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that I was looking forward to covering basketball for a week and just kind of taking a breath on football with signing day, obviously. But yeah, things change. It's funny too. Like people kept saying, "Don't you know how many things have to happen for Duke to get in there?" It's like, have you paid attention to the ACC this year?
and really for Duke, it's kind of crazy how the ACC tiebreakers work, because most people were saying, oh, okay, if SMU loses or if UVA loses, doesn't that mean that Miami's going to go, or a Pitt or a Georgia Tech? But no, Duke did what it needed to do to hang around. And Duke didn't obviously do much of anything in its non-conference slate, but with this league schedule, they were able to manage to find a way to just win the games that they should have, in a sense. And that is really why they're playing for an ACC championship on Saturday.
Yeah, it's that, and it's also just where we are with the tiebreaker stuff. And I think it's a different conversation with whether the tiebreakers need to change. But the way the tiebreakers are set up is it benefited Duke that I think there were 5 teams in the ACC that finished under 500 in the league, and Duke only played 2 of them. And then you look at the other side of it, Duke played the team that finished above everybody. They played Virginia and obviously lost to them a couple weeks ago. And they played one of the other teams that finished 6-2. And then there were 5 teams that finished 4-4 in the league, and Duke played 4 of them and went 4-0 against that group. I think off the top of my head, it was Wake, Clemson, NC State, and Cal, I believe, were all the 4-4 teams. And then I think Louisville was also 4-4 in the league. But like, you can only play who the league says you're scheduled to play. And in a 17-team league with an 8-game conference schedule, you're going to get this every single season. There's going to be unbalanced schedules. And here's the kicker of it is, everybody talks about this great season Virginia has. The only one of the 6-2, there were 5 6-2 teams in the ACC. The only one that Virginia played was Duke. So you talk about a team that, like, I'm not going to sit here and say they're a bad team and that they just got lucky with the scheduling, but I am going to say they didn't exactly play a gauntlet of the ACC schedule to be 7-1 in the league.
Oh, 100%. This Virginia Duke game is fascinating, because will Virginia kind of do what it did and take care of business and do all the things that we saw it do throughout the year? Their lone loss in league play coming without Chandler Morris. And of course, the NC State game, which non-league loss. But you have a Duke team that is probably capable of beating this Virginia team, just because of the way Virginia has not necessarily been as battle tested as this Duke team.
So the interesting part of it is you look at Duke's 5 losses. I would say 4 of the 5, they did more to beat themselves than the other team did to dominate them. The one that I would say is the exception is the Virginia game. Like, Virginia came out and just steamrolled Duke. Duke could not block Virginia's front. Like, I think Brian Parker, the Duke right tackle, who I put on my first team All ACC ballot, I think he's an NFL draft pick in a few months. I think he had given up 1 sack in his career before the Virginia game, and he gave up 2 that night. They could not block Virginia. They couldn't get off blocks against Virginia. Virginia's offense just went up and down the field. It was Virginia was 12 of 19 on third downs. Just an abhorrent critical down game for Duke's defense, which that's been the case for the last 3 games. They gave up 50% against Wake Forest, and it was like, oh, good job. That's an improvement, because they gave up 8 of 13 against Carolina. So that's the interesting part of this is, does Saturday look like a repeat of 2 weeks ago? Because if so, then all of the doomsday scenario talk, all of the consternation of what happens if the ACC gets completely left out of the playoff, that all goes out the window. And the if Virginia comes out and dominates Duke the way that they did 2 weeks ago, the ACC could get 2 in the playoff, because you're getting Virginia in, and then you're also looking at a 10-2 Miami team that has a head-to-head over Notre Dame. That I think the ACC's best move is to continue the PR spin that they've been running for the last couple of weeks about Miami should be in over Notre Dame. So that's kind of the interesting thing to me. And Duke will have to see what adjustments they make. Their defense has just been held together with duct tape and string for the last few weeks. They've been losing guys. They've basically played the last 2 games with 2 linebackers available, and they play 2 in their base defense. So Luke Mergott and Kendall Johnson have just been the Iron Men in the middle of that defense, and their secondary just plays a bunch of young guys. They've been 2 of their top 3 corners have both missed games in the past month. One of them was out, and then when the other one came back, the other one was out. So they're holding things together. It's going to come down to, I think, forcing turnovers. I think they actually did force turnovers, but one was a late pick 6 when it was already like a 31-10 game. So they're going to have to do kind of the same things they did to Wake Forest. They forced 4 against Wake Forest. Wake was casual with the football. Their ball security was bad, and Duke's got to kind of create some ways to get off the field other than just forcing punts, because that hasn't been happening much.
When you look at what Duke has as far as, I think, the experience playing the schedule that it did in non-conference, I think that's helpful in a sense. This Virginia team that they've already seen isn't still the best team that they've played all year in a sense. So there's, I feel like, a little bit more of that battle testedness that Duke has. And I'm interested to see how that shows itself now that they do get their rematch. That's the funny thing. Of course, you mentioned Miami having the win over Notre Dame head to head, but here's Virginia having a win at Duke, right off the bat. So the rematch, who knows? Maybe they'll have to play again next weekend to finalize the best 2 out of 3, but that is not how it works. You mentioned the injuries. Duke, are they going to get healthy for this game? Is there a possibility they're going to get some of these guys back into the fold?
I would wager a guess that Landon Callahan, the corner who's missed last 2, maybe they get him back. We weren't told he was a season-ending injury or anything like that. Maybe the freshman linebacker Bradley Gompers, he could help from a depth perspective and from a special teams standpoint. The other linebacker, the main linebacker that would really help them is Trey Freeman. He's a 5th-year guy. He's played a ton of football over the years. I'm hesitant to say that he would be back just because let me see if I remember this correctly. I think he missed the UConn game. He might have missed the Carolina game. Like, he came back for Virginia. He got re-injured against Wake Forest. Like, he's just been so banged up that I don't know if you can count on having a guy like that for a game. Trying to think off the top of my head. Their defensive line has been healthy. They've just been they've lacked some production over the last few weeks, maybe a couple of months. You could go as far to say. Really in the linebacker room, and then they've lost 2 linebackers for the season. Nick Morris Jr. they lost in the 4th game of the year, and they lost a freshman who was kind of filling in for him, Elliott Shopper. Lost him, I think, the Clemson game. So there's a little hope. Getting healthy in the secondary would definitely help, but I don't know if they'll get everybody back that they need.
What does Darian Mensah need to do this weekend to get this offense on the right track so that this time around there's changes in the final result for Duke?
So around him, they need to protect him better than they did the first time around against Virginia, because he was uncomfortable that whole game. It was the worst game he played, and part of that had to do with the pressure he felt. The other part is he's got to make decisive reads. When you're under pressure, when you feel it coming, you've got to get rid of it. You got to get it out to the hot, and he didn't do that enough against Virginia. I don't think he had a turnover in that game. He amazingly has 4 interceptions this year, and they all came in the non-conference games. He was 17-0 touchdown interception in ACC games, but he's got to find receivers early if Virginia is going to apply the same type of pressure. I mean, you can't just sit back there and Mitchell Melton's going to beat you. It's going to be bad news if you try to sit back there for 3 and 4 seconds against this Virginia defensive front. So they've got to do some different things offensively. And I went on a little bit of a rant on my podcast yesterday about this. Like, we talk so much about X's and O's football, and we make it as complicated as possible. It's still a game of 2 things. Can you block the guy in front of you, and can you tackle the other guy with the ball? And Duke, frankly, did not do the former. Like, they did not block Virginia in the first game. And if Duke does not block Virginia in this game, they're going to leave Charlotte at 7-6, and everybody's going to be saying they shouldn't have been in the game in the first place. And it's going to be a pretty simple discussion. But Duke's offensive line just has to play better. It really does become that simple when you talk about what Duke's offense has to do, and then what that will allow Darian Mensah to do, and what it would allow him to look like, and look like the quarterback that he's been for the most part this season.
I am still trying to figure out who I would pick whenever I've got to make my pick in this game. I am so intrigued by Duke because obviously we don't know beyond 25 what Duke is going to be ranked, or if they're going to go into this weekend ranked. That'll be something we find out Tuesday night, because I do think Duke, impressive in the sense that they demolished Wake Forest, that the way they did, especially the way they played, putting up 49 points. Let's go back to that game. What clicked in particular for Duke to really see that offense explode against a Wake defense that, for the large part this year has been the reason why Jake Dickert and company are where they are?
It was part of what Duke did. It was also a little bit of Wake Forest pulling a Duke. And by that, I mean, they did some self-destructing of their own. Duke had 7 touchdowns. The three long drives that they got for touchdowns, all of them had 2 explosive play penalties against Wake Forest defense. There were pass interferences, I think 1 personal foul and one of the first 2. You're making life a lot more difficult for yourself if you're giving Duke's offense free yardage, free first downs. I think one of them on the first drive was a 3rd down throw. And then of Duke's 7 touchdown drives, 4 of them were under 40 yards. There was a 20-yard punt by Wake Forest that put Duke at like the 34-yard line going in. There was a 80-yard kick return where Duke 2 plays later, Nate Shepard ran in a 13-yard touchdown. Like, those are things that obviously, it's not some great mystery of special teams can win you a game, turnovers can win you a game. But it was a lot of Wake Forest self-destruction as much as it was Duke dominating to score 49 points against Wake Forest, because Wake's defense, I think they still only gave up maybe less than 400 yards in that game. But just the hidden yardage in return yards and turnovers and bad punts, bad field position stuff. That's where it kind of got away from Wake. And to Duke's credit, I mean, you've got to go out there and take advantage. You can't go out there and settle for field goals when you're on the other team's 35 to start a drive.
All right, I'll leave you, or I'll get you out of here with this. Does Duke do it? Do they win? Do we get more ACC chaos in a sense?
I don't know. I've gone into the last 4 or 5 Duke games saying I have no idea what to expect. I have a pretty good feel for the teams I cover, especially after you've seen them for 12 games. I don't know what to expect from this Duke team. I honestly, Billy, I walked out of the Virginia game. I walked out of Wallace Wade 2 weeks ago. I thought there was a 30 to 40% chance this team would finish 5-7. Like, Carolina was trending better than they had been. And it's not like Duke dominated that one. That was a touchdown game where they're down 1 and had to run a fake field goal to get down to the 1 yard line and score with 2+ minutes left. And then Duke has a 4-0 turnover margin and gets outgained against Wake Forest and still wins. So this is kind of you don't want to say it's a bonus scenario for Duke because that implies that it wasn't earned. Like, they did earn this. They went 6-2 in the ACC, but man, it's really hard to predict what this team is going to do on a weekly basis.
No doubt. Well, Conor, thanks so much for the time this morning. It was a blast having you on, of course, and enjoy Charlotte this weekend as Duke takes on Virginia for the ACC Championship, 8:00 Eastern time on ABC. Conor O'Neill covering the Duke angle of it. Thanks for joining All Access AM.
Thanks, Billy.
There he goes, Conor O'Neill joining us this morning. We will get to more Week 14 breakdown on the ACC, finalize that last week of the regular season breakdown, and again, share some reaction to Tavita Pritchard being hired as the new Stanford coach. We'll do that after a short word from our friends at Sportsmo.
Sportsmo lets you make a more direct impact on the game because it lets you, the fans, fund your favorite college football teams in a straightforward way. In a you win and I'll give way. In a I need you to show me your running game is alive and then I'll donate way. These real-time tax-deductible microfunds lead to impact your team can feel. Every cent you send mixes with every drop of sweat they put in. Form your squad. Boost your friends when a play comes through. A new way to follow the game. And cha-ching, your favorite team. So what do you say, difference makers? Ready to power the play? Sportsmo. Download today. Let's smo.
That's right. Appreciate our friends at Sportsmo for sponsoring the show. Week 14, I shared some thoughts on the SMU side of things, and that team just saw their flaws, come to life again against Cal, and it cost them. The hole wasn't apparently too big and deep to dig out of. SMU did take that 35-31 lead with 2:22 to go, but the flaws of the secondary penalties, just that defense in late game situations has not been there this year. And last year's defense had those late game situations when they faced them kind of on lockdown in a sense until the ACC championship game, of course, giving up, that pass. Obviously the big return set them up last year, but SMU just as a whole this year was a team that you could see the talent, and when they were on, they were on, and it was that fourth quarter comeback for SMU and what they were able to do defensively for the most part, kind of in that quarter, was really impressive. The offense, Kevin Jennings finishes as a top 10 passer in passing yards in the regular season. You could see how this offense was able to cook, but man, you've got to give Nick Rolovich credit for the way he managed that game. They came into it wanting to bleed the clock, clearly kind of shorten some possessions, shorten some opportunities, but at the same time knowing that Sagapatelli was going to be able to get something on this SMU defense. He threw for 330 yards. He was spectacular, and SMU just could not force a turnover either. They just were not able to make that happen. And it It was a game that, man, SMU just completely left a golden opportunity out there because, and it was so shocking because you watch this SMU team and the way they played in league play outside of the Wake Forest game, it was really impressive as a whole. It really was. And they looked like they were clicking in such a way that a trip to Charlotte was certain. But man, you show up the way that they did and you do it on the road against a team that's inspired, you don't leave yourself much margin for error. And that's what, if you're an SMU fan, that's what you'd hope next year ends up changing for you. You know, that this team, which will be and look different next year, but will return a lot of critical pieces, has the experience and the hurt of finding out when you don't show up in certain situations and don't bring it for 60 minutes, where that's going to get you. And it's going to get you on the outside looking in a competitive league. And that's where SMU finds itself on this championship week Monday, is sitting at home, getting ready for National Signing Day. Let's get to a trio of ACC SEC matchups now on Saturday. Kentucky ends the Mark Stoops era with a 41-0 win over Kentucky. This is, man, as an ACC, team, this is exactly what the league needed. Kentucky was playing for bowl eligibility. Louisville had been banged up. They had been this, they had been that, but they absolutely exploded. 41-0 for Louisville to beat Kentucky. It started off kind of slow in a sense. Miller Moss throwing a touchdown, or sneaking it in there for the touchdown to open the game. But then from there in the second quarter is when it really got out of hand. It was 20-0 at the half. Here is the drive chart for Kentucky: punt, missed field goal, punt, downs, interception, downs, punt, end of the quarter. I haven't even listened to Josh Pate's Sarah McLachlan special, but if that's not it, I don't know what else it could possibly be. Embarrassing showing for Kentucky, but Louisville capitalized on the moment. They showed up. They didn't let their last three games impact them and how they were out of the conference championship race. They showed up and absolutely beat the brakes off of Kentucky. Great job by Jeff Brom and his staff to get this one for the ACC, because, man, if Kentucky would have beaten Louisville, it wouldn't have been unexpected. But, man, it really was a game that, when you look at what Louisville had been through, it just didn't seem like they were going to have that fight going into it. And speaking of that, Clemson finishes 7-5. Big finish for the Tigers this season, beating South Carolina 28-14. Clemson pitched a shutout in the second half. Just awesome job by that staff to finish with 4 straight wins and a little momentum. Of course, I expect some changes at Clemson. You can't have the season that they did over there and the expectations that they have without some of that. But I think those changes could very well be more personnel, more roster. How do they build the roster? Those are things Dabo Swinney has to consider, because his team showed over the final 4 games that they have a little something. Now, the schedule wasn't necessarily that daunting for Clemson in the final 4 games of the season. Florida State, Louisville, obviously, they got the win on the road there, 20-19, kind of aided by Louisville's, special teams, penalties, etc. Furman, and then a poor South Carolina team. But nonetheless, 2 wins for the ACC over, 2 of the lesser opponents in the SEC in a sense. But hey, if Missouri can be ranked without beating a team with a winning record, Clemson can certainly take the victory lap on South Carolina, as can Louisville. Florida beats up on Florida State, though, in the bad news of the day. We already talked about last week how Mike Norvell is safe. I don't think this was an awful showing for FSU. They just let it get away from them in that third quarter in particular, and Florida was able to kind of cruise from there. And, there's a lot of changes, obviously, for Florida State that still need to be made, and they will get right to work. No bowl game for the Seminoles, 5-7 on the year. They finished 0-5 on the road this season, so really, really tough there. Florida finishes 4-8. I mean, just a tough one for FSU. I I thought FSU would win this game. I really did. And for a minute there in that at the end of the first half, I wasn't feeling too bad about it. I thought if FSU could, kind of weather the storm of that rivalry game in the Swamp, they would figure it out. Instead, they lose 40-21, and they get right to work on what's next for that roster. Boston College goes up to Syracuse. And remember, we had talked about how BC was sitting there kind of moving up a little bit in our power rankings, albeit, we're talking about the bottom of the barrel here, but kind of moving up with their performance late in the season. And they were able to kind of capitalize on that momentum and beat Syracuse. Syracuse was our bottom feeder on the ACC power rankings. They lose 34-12. I mean, at least Syracuse got to double digits. I mean, that's about the only thing. But in a game of two teams that have a combined 5 wins, I mean, whew, what a game for BC to end with. 1 ACC win on the year. Poor Syracuse, their 1 win coming at Clemson earlier this year when Steve Angeli was still there. Duke does beat Wake Forest 49-32. We broke that down a little bit with Conor O'Neill. And last but certainly not least, NC State beats up on North Carolina 42-19. This is a game that NC State just had all the answers to the test offensively. CJ Bailey was able to manage it, 201 yards, 21 of 30. And then you had Will Wilson running for 200 or 4 touchdowns on the day in this one. So just credit to him as well for hanging with it at quarterback and stepping up for NC State. But just a game that I think for Dave Dorian obviously secured his future. He's returning for another season. I still think NC State has got to figure out some things that they do from a coaching staff perspective to get this thing on the right track. When you have CJ Bailey and his talent level, it's just getting wasted at this point in terms of finishing 7-5 and kind of doing some of the things that they're able to do in spurts, but not consistency. Again, NC State might be one of the best examples of why this league is competitive and it's hard to win week in, week out. Look at what they did to the conference championship race and dishing out some of the losses they did to those top teams in the league. What a week 14 it was. Obviously the chaos and kind of that changing of the projected ACC championship matchup going into the weekend happened. But there's also that coaching carousel chaos, but largely for the ACC, not impacting them at all. James Franklin obviously hired at Virginia Tech, and then Stanford getting to now hire Tavita Pritchard. We appreciate you guys listening for the week 14 breakdown. Do want to talk about Stanford hiring Tavita Pritchard, kind of my take on Stanford as a whole as we wrap up the show here in the final minutes. Stanford hires Tavita Pritchard, Washington Commanders quarterbacks coach, and a one-time Stanford Cardinal quarterback who, funny enough, Andrew Luck replaced and went on to have his illustrious career. But Tavita Pritchard did lead them to that historic win over number 1 USC back in the day, and those two have remained close. This is a program that is going to slowly but surely build itself up. That is the goal. They aren't going to be able to flip this thing overnight. They don't have the transfer portal to necessarily use like some of these other schools do. If they did, they'd have to use it on guys who can get into graduate school and do this and do that. It's really difficult for Stanford the way it is to use the portal and address things right away. So they've got to do it in the high school ranks. And they've got to find guys that you also, as you have them on your roster, you can't even plan for them to necessarily be graduate players at Stanford either, because it is so hard to get into those programs. I've seen multiple guys graduate from Stanford, not get into the graduate program that they are hoping to get into and have to move on. So the roster management that Andrew Luck has on the table for him to continue to work through is really, really interesting. But what I know is this: and it doesn't always work, but when you have people that care so much about a place that they won't be denied, that's what Stanford kind of feels like right now. Andrew Luck running the show there as the GM. You can see him on the sidelines. You can see him super involved and understanding the direction that Stanford needs to take. Sometimes that institutional knowledge is so critical to managing the roster, to managing the mindset of the team, and by that, the trademarks of the program that you want to develop. And while this is not a sexy hire by any means, and Stanford finishes 4-7 on the year, they'll get right to work on finishing out the signing class and then the portal if they can. This is a hire that you will see the best out of Stanford in its current stage from hiring a guy like Tavita Pritchard. He comes from the Washington Commanders, where he coached Jaden Daniels to his success, but he worked at Stanford over a decade before that, working his way up from a grad assistant to running backs coach to quarterbacks coach and receivers and offensive coordinator before heading to the NFL. And I think watching this hire, this is a duo now at the helm of Stanford that can go out and be on the same page in this next phase of building Stanford. And it could very well work out where Tavita Pritchard, who knows, does he call the plays? Does he hire an offensive coordinator? What is his imprint on this team and the fingerprints on his team that he's going to have? What are the staples? I'm really interested to see. We'll react to that later this week, as I assume we'll get more on the Stanford hire of Tavita Pritchard. It was kind of long assumed. It was just a matter of when it would work with the NFL side of things with the Washington Commanders. But they're, Washington's struggling this year without Jaden Daniels. But, you look at this hire, it is not sexy. I'm not saying it's going to work and yield huge results for Stanford. But I do think it's a hire that gets them back to bowl eligibility long-term. It gets them stabilized. It starts building a roster of players that obviously want to go to Stanford and get that degree. But I think there is a coolness to having Tavita Pritchard, a young coach, kind of maybe energize that program. That is one of the challenges out there. It is in a sleepy state as an athletics department as a whole, in a sense. But you have somebody who just was in the NFL as a tryout quarterback back in 2010. So still some youth there with him. I'm sure he'll bring a lot of energy, and he's worked with some of the most talented players in the world coming from the NFL. So a really, really interesting hire by Andrew Luck. It's somebody that obviously he trusts, and I think that trust in placing that with Tavita Pritchard and what he can do for this Stanford program is going to be really interesting to watch. So a lot of excitement, I think, will be brought from Tavita Pritchard. He's going to manufacture that energy, and we'll see how it goes on the field, because that's what ultimately matters. So Stanford gets its guy. Andrew Luck can now move on to other things within the program, raising more money, and also trying to get this signing class and any sort of transfers lined up. So we'll be reacting to Tavita Pritchard, James Franklin, kind of keeping a close eye on them this offseason as we do the show. National Signing Day is Wednesday as well. It runs through Friday. So we'll be keeping a close eye on some of these classes. We want to do maybe some recruiting breakdowns for some of you sickos out there, and kind of go maybe have a recruiting corner as we break down some of these recruiting classes from our On 3 and Rivals team, breaking down the recruiting side of things. And if you're watching on this Cyber Monday show, On 3 and Rivals running a Cyber Monday special, so check it out on on3.com or rivals.com. You can get the latest and greatest on whatever ACC team you like. So with that, guys, we appreciate you guys tuning in for our Monday edition of All Access AM. We are live 7 to 8 a.m. Central Time, 8 to 9 Eastern Time. Please hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel. We are inching closer to our goal of 200 by the end of this week. By the end of championship week, we want to be over 200. So please hit that subscribe button for us and join us at All Access AM. Again, Google the YouTube channel All Access AM, and it'll pop right up. Click the subscribe button. We really appreciate it, as well as we appreciate our sponsors, Security National Bank. Appreciate them for being such great friends and people to those of you out there who bank with them. So check them out, securitynational.bank, as well as Corporate Magic. Visit corporatemagic.com and learn how their events team can build you an incredible experience for your customers, for your colleagues, for whatever event you have. Corporate Magic can make it happen. And SportsMo, sportsmo.org. Help impact your college football team and learn more at sportsmo.org, and download the app today. We appreciate all of you guys for listening to this edition of All Access AM. We'll see you Wednesday morning, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm Billy Embody. Have a great Monday, everyone.